But that having been said, I am an international human rights lawyer. I'm a human rights person. I do want to get back to, to this. The Israeli military has an entire unit of lawyers that are set and ready to fly to any country, like any kind of European country, if an Israeli officer is arrested on war crimes, on a suspicion of war crimes. So, they're taking this seriously. If you just look at the vitriol and the extent to which the Israeli government has, gone crazy over this, it's clear that they're taking it seriously. If they thought that this was a prospect of, this was an unrealistic prospect and nothing would ever come of it, then they just ignore it. They wouldn't say anything. But that hasn't been the case. And so I just do think that it's something that, inshallah, will lead to some justice in Palestine. And
Thank you.
what yes, just in closing, the ICC is very important, but also important is the root of universal jurisdiction. Every country in the world has the jurisdiction. They have the right to try war criminals. This is a fundamental right in international law. So, this is also something that I believe that, we activists should push for. It's something which, doesn't have to wait for the ICC. I think the ICC is extremely important, but it doesn't have to wait for that. So I having said that, I'd be very, very quick and very, very short. I think I probably still went over my allotted time, but thank you very much. I hope we have time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we do have time for questions. So I really appreciate your time, the presentation, the academic details. I also appreciate the personal touch from your experience. Thank you also to the Palestine Dialogue Group in Istanbul for making this possible. And we welcome a few more people who have joined. So if you have any questions, please type them in chat and I can ask them, or raise your hand to ask them yourself. So I'll start with a question that Mustafa asked. So first he said, what you said is touching about people who could not be in Palestine and then, not have a problem with it. So Mustafa has two questions. The first is, how do you think we can draw people's attention to the Palestinian cause, encourage them to do something? That's his first question. What can we do? The second is, how do you think the political pressure on the PA is impacting the process of seeking justice from the ICC?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. The first question, in a way, that I guess the questions are a little bit related, of course, which is sort of understandable. But how to call attention to the Palestinian issue? I mean, I think there's a lot of attention, but it's just the attention is based on a lot of misconceptions and wrong narratives and bogus narratives that are propagated by the Israelis and by their allies in the media in a lot of countries as well. So I think what it is pushing forward the truth, our narratives. If I say that, it sounds like we're making things up too. I'm not saying that. It's pushing forward the truth and making sure that people see things for what they are. A lot of people in a lot of countries, you say Palestine and you think, oh, well, yeah, it's a religious conflict. And, it's just all so complicated. And, these people, they've been living in the same land for thousands of years and they can't get along. And, Muslims just hate Jews. And, all this kind of nonsense, all this kind of crap, which have been, just repeated over and over and over again in the so-called international media and also the national media in all these kind of countries. And I think the important thing is to counter those bogus narratives and to spread the truth. In many ways, that's already happening. And, if you look at the United States, young people in particular are getting less and less enamored with Israel. I don't want to make it sound like it's, there's going to be a dramatic change in the next year or so. But certainly, if you look at the numbers, it is actually quite dramatic, and especially the supporters of the Democratic Party, which have been generally just as bad as the other party, but certainly the supporters of the Democratic Party, the younger ones, are leaving the sort of pro-Israel camp in droves, and that's a very, very big deal. And part of that is the power of social media and the internet, and it just is much, much more difficult for the Israelis to hide what they're doing. And I think that's a good thing. And I think it's something, that we just have to continue to work on. So it's spreading the truth, really, for lack of a better word. I mean, to make sure that more people know what's going on, and to counter these kind of, lies that a lot of people have been socialized with. The pressure on the PA, yeah, sure. I mean, at countless times throughout this process, and also I remember the Goldstone report. I mean, this was in 2000, and I guess it was 2009. It must have been, because I was in Palestine. And when the so-called Goldstone report, the UN Commission came out, and even then, the Americans managed to pressure the PA into not pursuing it. But when the report came out, I mean, it was just, it was untenable for the PA not to do anything. So, in the end, they got on the bandwagon. But certainly that is a very, very, that is a big factor, and it's bad. But it's, again, with the International Criminal Court, it's not something which is unsurmountable. Now that the prosecutor is moving with an investigation, it has to, there's a momentum of its own. And it doesn't, it certainly is not relying on the PA to provide legal briefs or provide information or that kind of thing. Yes, the PA has its avenues to do that. But the amount of information that NGOs have been giving is it's monumental, and it's so big. It's just incontrovertible what is going on in Palestine. You can't argue with this. So yes, the pressure on the PA has been extremely problematic in political fora, like the UN General Assembly, and also the Security Council, well, certainly the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council and some of these other political fora. But those are political fora. The ICC at least is supposed to be at least a legal fora. So it's the PA and the pressure on the PA to influence this and sort of tone everything down is less. It's not zero, unfortunately, but it is less. I hope that
Yes,
answers.
Yes, it's very clear. So we have a question from Rania Abu Shamada. She's saying, the UN are those who divided Palestine.
Yes,
They
indeed.
never stuck up for us. Why should we care about international law?
I don't have a great answer to that, except to say that it is something. I mean, the international law is a tool, and we see that it is a tool that can be used effectively to garner political support and to bring about change. And why do we know that? We see that partially because the Israelis are using it. I mean, the Israelis have been using this in a very, very effective way from the time of 262, from the resolutions, not only the partition resolution, but also the resolutions after the 67 war, all these kinds of things. The Israelis, they put immense energy into producing international law briefs and using these legal arguments to advance what they want to do. And it's a funny thing about law, international law and also national law. I mean, of course, there are political influences to how law works. I mean, we all know that, and we all see that. Palestine is a very, very stark case, but we see it around us in our everyday lives even. But at the same time, people and countries, they want to look like they're abiding by the law. They want, they want people to think that they're good citizens. States do that too. I mean, it's like that. It's definitely the case with the state of Israel and with every country, really. International law, even if there are no sort of serious sanctions that one can see in the immediate term, it still has this power to influence states and to influence governments in the long run. I do believe that. Yes, of course, I completely understand. I've been doing this research on Palestine for years, and I see how international law has, or the international community, let's say, has failed the Palestinian people over and over and over again. But it's what I would say is it's less the sort of politics of the international community and more the law that can be used as a tool. Because even countries like the United States, if they are pointed to as a violator of law, they get uncomfortable. They don't want that to happen. They don't like to be looked at as a country that operates legally. That no country wants that. So that's where these legal arguments can come into play, and they can influence people. It doesn't work 100% of the time. It doesn't, it's not necessarily a linear process, and it's not something which necessarily brings about immediate change, but it can work. I do believe that it can work.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for the balanced answer. So we have Zahra Shaikha who has raised her hand. Go ahead.
Hello, Professor Saul. It's very nice to meet you. This is Zahra, project coordinator from the Palestinian Dialogue Group. And I do have two questions. The first one, in your opinion, is there a real chance that Israel will be ever held accountable for its crimes in the ICC? And if yes, what will it take to make it happen? And the second one is, what is the political role of the UN in stopping the aggressions on the Gaza Strip? The political role.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, I'm just saying, oh dear, because these are answers which would, of course, take like 90 minutes, but that's okay. Is there a real chance for Israel to be held accountable? Yes, I definitely believe that. And I'm not just saying that. I mean, of course, I'm an international human rights lawyer. I'm a human rights guy. I spent my entire career on the belief, based on the belief that the good guys will win in the end and justice will triumph in the end. And I do honestly believe that. What will it take? Of course, these legal arguments are very, very important. What happens in the ICC are very, very important. But also the politics are extremely important. In particular, the politics of what's happening in the United States. And again, I get back to what I said before. The politics in the United States, the opinion is shifting. That's very clear. You look at these opinion surveys, young people in particular, but in general, supporters of the Democratic Party, they are less and less enamored with Israel. They are more and more knowledgeable of the horrendous abuses that are taking place. And they're leaving Israel in droves. And again, that's why the Israelis and the Israeli lobby in the United States are going crazy about this. That's why they have pushed forward these laws, mainly at the state level. They tried at the federal level. They're going to do it, at least not in any kind of real way. But at the state level, these laws basically trying to outlaw the boycott of Israel, right? And what's happening in universities in the United States is just beyond belief. I mean, you stand up for Palestinian rights as a professor, and you're basically, you can be kicked out. You're very vulnerable. But this is a relatively recent thing, and it's because they see the writing in the wall. It's because they see opinion is shifting against them, and they're just going crazy. They're going crazy trying to stop this, but they can't. They won't be able to do it. And definitely part of that is, social media, the internet. People see what's happening. It's not, this ain't rocket science. You go to Google, Israeli settlement, human rights violation, or whatever, and you see this. You go to B'Tselem, you go to Al-Haq, you don't even have to do that. You just do a few Google searches and you'll see these things. You'll see what's going on. So, all of this evidence is incontrovertible. And I think really that will be, that'll be the big turning point. Often when I do these talks, certainly in Japan, people ask about, the peace movement in Israel, and I just like, yes. I mean, there are very serious peace organizations and human rights organizations in Israel. They do excellent work, but it's just not going to happen. I mean, and you see the government of Israel, and you see how people are voting in the state of Israel. It's not going to happen. So really, change has to come from the outside, in particular the United States. When the United States changes, everything is going to change. Whether that'll be, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, I don't know. But definitely, I'm confident that it will happen. And the funny thing is with the United States is that it can happen very quickly. It can be very dramatic. So, we just have to see. Nobody thought the Berlin Wall would ever come down until it just happened. So, it definitely will happen, and it could happen, sooner than we think. Inshallah, it will happen very soon. The political role of the UN in Gaza, oh dear. Well, this is one of those many instances where the UN, unfortunately, continues to fail the Palestinian people in gross and obscene ways, because the UN is part of the quartet, the Middle East quartet, that they basically, the UN has shot itself in the foot and basically has barred itself from dealing with Hamas in any kind of serious way. And when I was in the United Nations in Gaza, I mean, it was ridiculous. We were there to provide capacity building stuff, but we dealt with, of course, NGOs in Gaza, many of which are excellent, and grassroots organizations and all that kind of thing. But anything that involves capacity building for the authorities, oh, no way. We couldn't even talk with them. We weren't even allowed to talk with them. It's got a little bit better, around when I left, it got better. And there were we found ways to do work effectively, but it remains a problem. And it's one of the only situations in the world where the UN cannot work with both parties to the conflict. Really is terrible. But again, it's not a legal thing, it's a political thing. So what has to happen is, the Western powers, in particular the United States, has to basically allow the UN to do its work. And that's the political change will only come about through, or it'll only come about through political change, I think.
All right.
Yeah.
We have one more question from Nurbanu Sukas. As we know, during Ramadan, Israel always increases its oppression and destroys Palestinians' homes. So Ramadan is coming. So do you expect anything? And do you think that Israel will just continue to do what they wish without any sanctions?
Well, again, it's whether sanctions will come in the immediate term, I don't know. I mean, certainly, I hope and pray all the time that they will. But this is something that we don't know. But definitely, changing the politics are changing. That's very, very clear, and especially with this government full of extremists. Yes, bad things could happen. I mean, I'm not denying that. Of course, bad things happen. Bad things happen all the time, and I think it was the year before last, if I remember correctly, at Ramadan, was just it was disgusting what they did. But especially with these extremists, the international community is more and more seeing Israel for what it really is, or maybe I should phrase it a different way. It's becoming impossible for the United States and for some of the other Western countries to pretend that Israel is a nice country, democratic country, and they're human rights minded, very nice people. It's impossible to maintain this pretense now. And so I think, whether it will happen in time for this Ramadan in a few days, that I kind of doubt, but certainly the politics are shifting, and that will definitely lead to justice and definitely lead to accountability. I do definitely believe that, inshallah.
All right, let me conclude with a question of my own. So yes. I noticed you mentioned not only apartheid, but also settler colonization, which is a welcome word and concept to use. You had a clear diagnosis that Zionism aims at the Jewish colonization of Palestine. And you mentioned that the two-state proposal is not a solution and is clearly unjust. So my question to you would be, what would you consider to be a just solution in terms of human rights and fairness? Would it be one state? Would it be a state exclusive to Jews, or would it be one democratic state of all its citizens?
Yeah, indeed. I'm always kind of hesitant to talk about these things too much, because I just kind of feel like I'm not Palestinian, so I don't think I don't think I have the right to sort of go around and say this is what you should do and this is what you shouldn't do. But I do think that from the perspective of human rights and the perspective of international human rights law, justice needs to happen. The two-state solution is, first of all, now, I mean, it's clearly not going to happen. I mean, I think finally people in the sort of so-called international community and these kind of policy making positions are finally, being forced to face the fact that the colonization of the West Bank has come to the point where it's just, this two-state solution is just like this mirage. I mean, it's an illusion. And it always was unjust because it was based on the idea that despite the fact that this was, all Palestinian land practically, that somehow, oh yeah, well, you guys just divide up the land amongst, the way we say 50-50, and then everything will be fine. This is a clearly unjust solution. Certainly an exclusively Jewish state would not be just in any way, shape, or form. So I think we could just, throw that out the window. One democratic state, yes, I think that sounds great. And it looks, in principle, it sounds great. I think from the perspective of being a human rights lawyer, my question would be, what exactly does that look like? And in particular, how are violations addressed? A lot of countries have gone, they've gone through conflicts, and then they have this kind of post-conflict setup where they have different kind of arrangements to address past violations. Some of these have not been so great, and I think what's important is that there's some kind of arrangement where past violations are, looked at and addressed in a serious way, so that people don't get off scot-free. The whole transitional justice idea has gone past the notion that some people had at the beginning, that we should have an overall amnesty for people who did bad things in the past. That's the only way we can have peace. No, that's the worst way to go about this. But so what exactly happens? For example, just look at the colonies in the West Bank. So say the whole place becomes one democratic state. Okay, but what happens to this? I mean, these people, you had these people, they've been driven off their land, and now we have these exclusive Jewish-only cities. Okay, well then let's make these cities. Okay, so then let's say that the colonies, anybody can live there, so Palestinians can live in the colonies too. Well, okay, but what about the economic disparity? The people who clearly the purchasing a home in the colonies is far more expensive than a lot of the Palestinians in rural areas in the West Bank will ever be able to afford. What are we looking at there? And what about the people who don't want to live in these places? These are kind of not so nice, aesthetically. They want their land, they want their old house. Well, what are we going to do about that? So these kind of questions, I think, are very they're serious questions. They can't be just poo-pooed off. I'm not saying that anybody's doing that, but I'm saying that as we talk about a one democratic state, as we talk about a one-state solution, these kind of these issues have to be looked at, and they have to be looked at very seriously, with the idea or with the aim of making sure that past violations are addressed and that people are held accountable, and that people who want a remedy are able to have that remedy. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. This was very clear, and thank you for your presentation and your willingness to answer questions. There are no more questions. So once again, we thank the Palestinian Dialogue Group in Istanbul for making this possible. Thank you, Saul, for your presence today and for all your efforts for our cause. And thank you to all who have attended.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It was wonderful.